This has been one of our main stories today, the Constitutional Court upholding an earlier ruling which found that parts of the Executive Code of Ethics are unconstitutional and invalid. The ruling will likely have a bearing on funding for ANC leaders, possibly, as well as other parties, when you consider the sort of monies that are poured into the campaigns of politicians who want to be right at the top of an organization such as the ANC. It's a controversy that was sparked by an investigation by the Office of the Public Protector by a Bosasa donation to Cyril Ramaphosa's campaign to lead the ANC back in 2017. A court found that she basically had no jurisdiction to investigate that because the law at the time had not made provisions for that. Let's take this up with Lawson Naidoo from the Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution. Lawson, a very good afternoon to you. Thank you for being with us. Do you think this will cause a monumental shift in how internal party campaigning is done?
Well, firstly, let me say, Tim Bikile, I think this is a very important judgment that strengthens the foundations of our constitutional democracy, because it now provides that funding of internal party campaigns, such as at party conferences for positions within a party, are subject to disclosure, will become subject to disclosure once the Executive Ethics Code is amended as it needs to be in the next 12 months as ordered by the Constitutional Court today. So this is a victory for transparency, and it builds on the Political Party Funding Act, which already regulates external funding to political parties. But we now have the basis for a legal framework to regulate internal party funding.
And the court said this code falls short of the constitutional and statutory requirements of transparency. When you consider how long political parties in this country have been running internal conferences, which ultimately, if you're in the ANC, for example, could see you become president of the country, you wonder why this was not an issue that was taken up perhaps much sooner.
Yeah, I mean, I think, there wasn't the level of scrutiny of internal party funding until relatively recently, with the last few particular ANC national conferences where we've seen huge amounts of money being used by candidates to lobby for positions. So I think, it's come to the fore. As I said, we've only had the Political Party Funding Act in place for 4 years now. So, we're building on the basis of strengthening our democracy in this regards. And then I think the court was, in its judgment today, Justice Majid, to deliver the unanimous decision of the Constitutional Court, went out of his way to explain why this is important, not just in terms of openness and transparency, but in terms of the broader fight to combat corruption within our society, the nexus between money and politics, not just in South Africa, but everywhere. And that this is one of the tools that needs to be used in order to ensure that there is full disclosure, so that the public can be informed of who is funding these internal party contests. But
for those curious about the CR17 funding, I understand this does not bring them any closer to finding out who donated how much, because it's not a change that will apply retrospectively.
That's correct. The court also emphasized that this will have no retrospective effect. The court had already ruled in terms of the President Ramaphosa's review of the Public Protector's report that there was no basis for the Public Protector to make the finding that President Ramaphosa was under a duty to disclose the funders of the CR17 campaign, because the code had to be construed as it exists then and it still exists now. And in that context, the disclosure did not fall within the ambit of the code, but that is now going to be amended going forward, and the president has been given 12 months in order to amend the code.
And those wishing to perhaps back their shall we say, favorite horse in the race to lead the ANC come December, they too will have, shall we say, a gap at this point, because there's a 12-month period to fine-tune this bit of law.
Well, more than likely that will be the case, unless, of course, the president acts very speedily and effects this amendment before December. But
what are the chances, Lawson?
That I would say that they are very slim at best.
And let's talk about democracy, transparency, and knowing who supports who financially, because South Africa also has what is not necessarily a unique dynamic, by the way, where you find that one person, one entity supports people in more than one organization, almost seemingly hedging their bets, even in donating to the various political parties. We've had people, for example, at a party level who've given to the ANC but also given to the DA in the past.
Yeah, look, I mean, and there are various reasons for that. It may be a case of, as you put it, hedging their bets. But it may just be that, people are wanting to support the democratic process. And we have to accept, in a modern democracy, that political parties do need to raise money in order to campaign effectively, to run political organizations. So their funding is necessary. And in that context, it may be seen that, certain donors are simply supporting the process of democracy by assisting, a range of political parties. And you will also note, Tembekile, that in terms of the Political Party Funding Act, there is something called the Multi-Party Democracy Fund, in which the ISC manages and encourages private sector donors to contribute to that fund, so that the monies from there can be shared amongst all political parties.
Right, and that party issue is separate, of course, to what we are talking about, which has to do with individuals who are campaigning within their various organizations. Just on that, is it fair to assume that anyone who backs a Lawson Naidoo campaign, for example, or backs me, if I were to be nominated in a party or were to run, is it fair to assume that whoever pours money into that ambition is necessarily seeking to buy influence? Because that's where it seems to be going in the conversation to some degree.
Well, I mean, I think the first point to note there is the fact that, this only applies to members of the executive, deputy ministers and MECs and premiers. It would not apply to you or I that were standing for election, because we don't hold any public office and we would not be bound by the code. But I think the broader principle that there should be greater levels of transparency in all electoral contests within political parties is one that should be supported.
Do you expect the political parties themselves, at this point, yes, I know we're talking mainly about the ANC because, as you're saying, these are people who are already in office. Do you expect that there'll be an unhappiness to some degree with this development?
Well, I think we've seen a general reluctance by political parties and individuals contesting positions within political parties to disclose all of their funding. There are limits put in place and so on. So I think, I think this judgment certainly, in terms of the way the judgment itself is set out, explains very clearly the rationale behind it, in that we want to ensure that our politics is corruption-free, and that political office bearers, whether in political parties or in the state, are free from undue influence.
Lawson Naidoo, good to speak to you. Thank you.